Hi everyone. As we saw in my last video, the Daihatsu had been parked up for about 13 years before I got hold of it. So I decided I was going to drop the oil and put some fresh stuff in there before trying to start up the engine. And I was very glad that I did. If you follow along now, I'll show you what I found. Just cracking the sump off here and then unscrewing it by hand. Got my hand out of the way to avoid the oil pouring out, but I needn't have worried. As you're seeing, what came out was closer to grease than oil. There really isn't any flow there, and it was clear that it's a bit sludged up, and I was going to need to take some additional measures to get it out. First thing I tried was simply using some solvent to just sluice through the sump. In this case it's some white spirit, which I had to hand. By pouring it in through the dipstick tube using a funnel, which you can see is the bottom end of a large syringe, it's going straight into the sump, and with the sump plug still removed, that's then flowing out underneath the car into the drain tub, hopefully carrying some loosened up sludge out with it. Now, this is what I found that I got out the sump doing that, and frankly, it's absolutely horrific. I've been working on cars, one way or another, for something like 20 years, and I have never seen something like this come out of sump. In fact, about the closest thing I can relate it to is this.
I am a skin of evil.
Trekkie nonsense notwithstanding, I wanted this stuff out. Clearly some had already been shifted, but I decided to give it a bit more opportunity to get softened up and loosened off. For doing this, I used just plain old diesel. So the sump plug's back in, and I'm now filling up the sump with diesel that I've just got from the petrol station. Some of you older guys might know the trick of draining some oil out an engine, topping it off with diesel, and then running the engine so it acts as an engine flush. It does work. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of it myself, but what I'm doing here is very similar in principle. Having left the engine to just sit and soak with a big sump full of diesel for a good few hours, I pulled the sump plug once more, and this time I was greeted with this.
Okay, so we've done our best to get what was in there out. Got some more oil here to go in it. It's just oil that I had lying around. It's the right kind of weight, and frankly it's only going to be used for flushing it out and then refilling it to see what's getting on. One of the things that is interesting, you'll see I've got the front number plate off here, and that's because, I don't know if you can see in there, but that's where the oil filter is. So you've actually got a little hole here to access the oil filter, which is not bad. I've just stuck a new one on there because I figure, what the hell, we might as well try and filter what we can.
My plan was to see if the car started, and if so, run it for a bit with fresh oil and a new filter, which would help clean out and capture any further sludge as the engine warmed up, and then I could change the oil and filter once more. First thing I needed though was some fresh petrol to give it a better chance of firing up. Although I've found engines will often start on surprisingly old fuel, there's no point in making things more difficult. I'd had the battery charging up for a couple of days as it was totally dead, but with that done, plus the fresh fuel, I was ready to crank it over. I was glad to find that it did indeed crank, and also that the engine oil pressure light went out after a few seconds. Now it was time to actually try a start. I knew this would need several attempts, and as you can see from the counter on the screen, I wasn't wrong. But soon there were some signs of life. and on the 5th attempt I had an engine turning on its own, albeit very roughly at first, though with one more crank, this time it was a lot happier. So, the engine does run, and one of the biggest potential hazards of buying something like this, that it's completely seized, has been crossed off the list.
The only thing I might be concerned about is if in the turbo, if the oil feed into the turbo, if that's a bit clogged up. But all I can really do now is just run the engine, and as the engine's there getting warmed up with nice clean oil in it, hopefully that oil will help pull out anything that's in there, and I'll just avoid putting the engine under too much load. And what I'll do after a little while, I will drop the oil again and see how dirty it is. I expect it will be filthy, and we'll take it from there. I'm hoping the turbo won't be too caked up, because from what I can see, this looks to me like it's actually got a water-cooled turbo. So it's not just relying on the oil to cool it, which means, in theory, it won't be too full of burnt-on oil if it's been kept at a sensible temperature. But who knows? We'll have to see. Okay, yeah, that's pretty nasty.